In this video, I'm going to show you a method that will get you promoted faster, earn you more money, and finally get you recognized at work without working longer hours or becoming that guy who never shuts up about what they're doing. And it's called the lazy method. It's a simple four-step framework that helped me go from answering phones to director level, earning consistent pay rises along the way, not by doing more work, but by doing less of what leadership ignores and more of what actually makes you more valuable. But to understand why the lazy method is the fastest way up the career ladder, then you need to understand where most people go wrong. And to do that, then let me show you this graph. All right, so what I've got on screen here is something that I call the promotion grid. Now, along the bottom axis is your work effort. So that means like how hard you're actually working. And then along the vertical axis is visibility. Now, that doesn't mean that your boss just sees you. It means how much leadership actually appreciates and values and recognizes what you're actually doing and contributing to the business. Now, what's interesting is you can pretty much plot anyone on this graph, including yourself. So, for example, if I think back to the start of my career, I probably put myself somewhere around here. I was working hard, I was trying to prove myself, so I'm quite far along the effort line, but I'm not very high on the visibility line. So that means leadership didn't really see or care about my contribution. And if they had, then what I would do is I'd move up vertically and maybe I'd be somewhere around here. And this graph can be divided into these four zones. And the key to getting promoted is being in the right zone, because only one of them will actually move your career forward fast and the others will just quietly keep you stuck. And that's what the lazy method is about. It's about moving you to the zone that will actually get you promoted the fastest. And if you think the best zone to be in is this one in the top right, then you'd be wrong. So keep watching and I'll explain the actual best zone to be in and how to get there. So this bottom left corner is what I call the dead zone. And it's called that because you're not really doing much and no one really sees it anyway. And when that happens, the people in this zone don't get promoted and they don't get pay rises and they're probably not going to have a job for very long anyway. So that means you want to avoid this zone completely. Now, if you move across to the bottom right by working harder, this is where a lot of ambitious people end up stuck in their careers. And for good reason, I call this the burnout zone. That's because you're grinding, you're fixing problems, you're staying late, you're holding the team together, but leadership don't really see it, or worse, they just don't really value that kind of contribution. And this zone can be exhausting. And over time, it can start to feel personal, like, why am I not really getting promoted or recognized? And I would say that this is where most professionals are. They're doing great work, it's just not the kind of work that leadership recognizes and rewards. So naturally, the people in this zone think the answer is more visibility. And this means that they start increasing their visibility, but it pushes them into the top right quadrant. And you'd think that this is the sweet spot because you're working really hard, showing you're valuable, and you're being recognized for it. But the thing is, it's not. And that's why I call this the brag zone. Now, you've probably seen it at work, right? The people constantly broadcasting their wins, looping others into every task, over-explaining every little success. And yes, sometimes that visibility helps, but most of the time, it just comes across as needy. You look like you're trying too hard, and that's going to hurt you more in the long run than it's actually going to help. So that means where you actually want to be is up here in the top left. Now, this is what I call the leverage zone because you're really visible and appreciated, and your work is respected and rewarded. And the difference between this zone and this zone is that you focused on the stuff that actually moves the business forward, and leadership recognizes that. And even though that, yes, you're technically doing less, you come across as more confident and more in control and more senior. And that's what this system is about. That's why it's called the lazy method. It's not about doing less work, but it's more about doing the right work. So if you're tired of grinding out in the wrong zone, then stay tuned because I'm going to show you the simple four-step process that will move you from wherever you are on this grid into the zone where career growth actually happens. So let's get into it. All right, so step one is leverage, and getting this right is going to save you years of hard work and grinding and actually get your career moving too. So let me ask you this. When you sit down at a restaurant, what's the first thing you see when you open a menu? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a list of ingredients because you see the name of the meal, right? You get a title, a short description, maybe they got a fancy photo, and of course you have the price. But the ingredients, well, those are often buried in the fine print because the thing is, no one really knows what the meal is just based on the ingredients. Like, imagine if the menu read something like minced beef, tomatoes, spices, $14.99. Well, that could be a bolognese, that could be a taco, it could be something horrible. And if you don't recognize what the ingredients of the meal actually are, then you don't understand what it is you're going to order, and then you don't pick it. And that's exactly what most people screw up at work. You're listing out the ingredients, which means the tasks and the deliverables that you do, instead of telling leadership the meal you actually have. And when that happens, decision makers don't understand really what it is you contributed by doing all of those tasks. And so they don't pick you either. But what does listing the meal instead of the ingredients at work actually mean? Well, it looks like this. Instead of saying, I built 3 dashboards and ran weekly check-ins, you instead say, I helped the sales team cut response time in half. Instead of, I cleaned up the customer database, you instead say, I unlocked a segment that brought in 200K in new revenue. And you see the difference. One lists tasks and the other shows your impact. Because decision makers, when it comes time to promotion, is really they're just skimming the menu. And if they don't instantly understand the value of what you did, then they just move on to the next name. And that's why the first step of the lazy method is called leverage. Your job isn't to report what you did, it's to package what you did in a way that makes them go, oh yes, I want to order one of them. And if you do this right, then you'll increase your visibility, moving you up into these zones of the quadrant. But just by increasing your visibility, you're still going to have a problem because if you started down here, grinding away with little recognition, then increasing your visibility puts you at risk of moving you into this wrong quadrant. That's why this next step matters, because it's going to nudge you further across towards the quadrant where people actually get promoted. So that brings us to the next step, A, which means alignment. So this is the 1989 Tour de France. It's the final day of the race that stretched across 3,200 kilometers, and the crowd lines the streets of Paris watching the cyclists complete the last stretch. At the finish line stands Cathy LeMond, waiting for her husband Greg to appear on the horizon. Now, Greg LeMond is the last hope for Team USA. To win, he needs to beat France's Laurent Fignon, who just set a new world record time for the final stretch. It seemed unreachable. After 23 days of riding, the idea that someone could claw back enough time to win now felt impossible. But Greg had made a small decision that changed everything. He was using a new kind of aerodynamic handlebar, the first of its kind in the Tour de France. Now, it wasn't flashy, it didn't make him stronger or more determined, it simply helped him cut through the air more efficiently, a quiet edge in a race decided by seconds. As the final kilometre approached, Cathy listened to the updates crackling through the radio, and it was bad news. Greg was still behind, he needed to gain more time and the track was about to run out. Greg pushed hard in the last stretch of road, aware that France set a new record time, but determined to at least give USA their best time yet. When he crossed the finish line, everyone stayed quiet. It wasn't obvious what had just happened. People assumed that France had won, but then the time came through on the scoreboard and the crowd erupted. Greg falls to the floor. The scoreboard read he completed the race 8 seconds faster than France. After more than 3,000 kilometers of racing, the Tour de France was decided by 8 seconds, the narrowest margin in its history. And that story, well, it stuck with a man named David Brailsford, who years later would become the performance director of the struggling British cycling team. And Dave couldn't stop thinking about this win, because Greg didn't win through luck or strength or drama. He won through something that looked insignificant, the aerodynamic handlebars. It was a change so small that most people in the race didn't even bother. But it ended up making all the difference, and that inspiration became the foundation of Brailsford's strategy. If a small thing can win the biggest race in the world, then what happens when every small thing is aligned to winning the race? You see, at the time, the British cycling team was an utter joke, and I can say that because I'm British. They had never come close to winning the Tour. In fact, They hadn't even won an Olympic cycling medal in nearly 100 years. The team was so underperforming that they struggled to even find bikes to use in the race because most bike manufacturers didn't want to be associated with them. And yet, year after year, they trained harder, they pushed more, they spent longer on the bike, they tried to outwork their competition, and they believed that pure effort would eventually deliver results. Well, it didn't. It just led to fatigue, to injuries, and ultimately disappointment. So, remembering the story of Greg LeMond, Dave tried something new. Instead of trying to outwork everyone, they focused on alignment. So, everything the team did, from equipment choices to recovery routines to how they structured their days, had to point toward one goal, which is winning the Olympic gold within 5 years. If something didn't serve that purpose, then they dropped it. And if it did, they refined it. They looked at the full system, not just the training sessions, but sleep quality, travel habits, nutrition, even the kind of pillows the riders brought to the events. It wasn't about intensity, it was about consistency in the direction of a single objective, and it worked. Not in 5 years, but in 3. The lesson here is that most people approach their careers like the British cycling team approached racing, working harder and harder every year, logging longer hours, grinding themselves down, and just getting nowhere. So, what this means for you is this: it's not even enough to talk about the impact you've made, because if that impact isn't clearly aligned to what the business actually values, like revenue, growth, and efficiency, then this makes you seem like a doer and not a contributor. And when that happens, you're going to get stuck in this quadrant, doing the hard work, but loudly trying to speak about it. So, what this means is you not only need to talk about your contributions instead of tasks, but you also need to make sure those contributions are aligned to the business. And doing that will make you come across as productive and valuable instead of just a hardworking kiss ass. Now, traditionally, people are going to tell you that aligning to the business was something that leaders and execs do in strategy meetings. And I guess I kind of used to agree until I started watching people jump from 60K to 120K roles because they used alignment in how they framed their work. So this means that you don't need a leadership title. You just need to talk about your work in a way that shows alignment. So how do you do that? Well, I use a really simple structure for this, which I'll show you now. All you need to do is say what you did, what outcome it produced, and then what pain or cost it avoided. So instead of saying, I fixed the onboarding process, you instead say, I realigned our onboarding process to improve new hire engagement, helping them reach full productivity faster without needing extra headcount on a smaller budget too. And consistently talking about your contributions like that will move you out of the hard-working kiss-ass zone and into the space where promotions actually happen, because you're no longer just shouting about the work you did, you're helping leadership understand your value. Now, before you go, ooh, goody, yes, you need to listen to the rest of these things, because it's not quite as simple as that. Because the thing is, in this quadrant, you're not going to be alone. There's going to be plenty of other people who have figured this out too. And for all those people, there might only be like 2 or 3 promotion spots available every year or two, meaning even if you're in the right quadrant, they could end up picking someone else. So how do you stand out and make sure that you're the one who gets picked? Well, that brings us to, and I'm really sorry about this, but Z stands for signal. I mean, come on, there's just not that many words that begin with Z. I'm trying my best here. Anyway, have you ever been driving down the road and you've seen like a billboard for a new sofa and you've thought to yourself, who's out here dropping 3 grand on a corner suite on a whim? Well, the thing is, they're not really expecting you to from that billboard. You see, they're not trying to convince you to buy the sofa today, because what they're actually doing is known as signaling. So that means they're out there just reminding you they exist. They're planting the idea that they've got good deals on sofas, and this keeps them staying top of mind, so that in 6 months or 2 years from now, when your back's hurting and your old couch just looks rubbish, they're the first people you think of. And that's exactly what you want to be doing in your career. The thing to understand is your next promotion is just like your old sofa. The need for a new sofa or the opportunity for your promotion isn't going to come around that often, but when it does, you want the decision makers to already have your name in front of mind, because you've been signaling consistently, and that's how you're going to get ahead of everyone else in this quadrant. How exactly do you signal without just flat out asking for a promotion? Well, the thing is, that's kind of what you do. Now, that doesn't mean you're just going to walk in to your boss's office and say, hey, give me a promotion right now, because obviously that's not going to work. What you do instead is more like the sofa ad. You let them know that you're available and that you've got a killer deal on a 3-piece suite with a matching futon. In other words, you let them know that you're looking to move up and that you're going to be a good choice for that future role when it becomes available. Now, here's a simple line that has consistently worked for me. You say, hey, I'd love your feedback on how I can start preparing for the next level, even if it's not immediate. And so this signals that you're thinking beyond your current role. Then every so often, until you get that opportunity, you just remind them of this. You say something like, hey, I took on that project that you suggested, and here's how it went, and here's what I learned from it. And if you've been doing everything else right, then when that next opportunity comes along, because you've been letting people know that you're trying to grow and you've been contributing in ways that leadership actually value, then they don't ask who they should give this promotion to, they ask, when can you start? But I should warn you, because this is where a lot of people stumble, because once you start getting noticed, it's easy to fall into this trap of trying to do too much. Because you're finally getting visibility and recognition, you start trying to want to prove yourself. So you start taking on more, you say yes to everything, you jump into every detail. And when that happens, you end up going backwards, right into the quadrant that you were trying to escape. So to avoid that, we come to Y, which means yield. And this is an essential one because it goes against what most of us have been taught. You see, when you're trying to prove yourself, the instinct is to say yes to everything. But that's a real career killer, because when you're involved in everything, it doesn't make you look essential. It makes you look quite junior, because the higher up you go, the less involved in the actual work and doing you actually are. So this step is about yielding, which means letting go of all that noise and focusing on the things that actually matter. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean not pulling your weight or doing your job properly. What it actually means is acting like the next level before you get there. How exactly do you do that? Well, when a task comes along, I find it helpful to ask myself, not can I do this, but instead I ask, what would someone at the next level do with this? Would they take it on? Would they delegate it? Would they challenge the value of doing it at all? The key to yielding correctly is not that you're trying to look busy. It means you're trying to look ready. And readiness means showing that you can prioritize, you can zoom out, you can make trade-offs. It doesn't mean just doing more stuff. Because the people who are going to rise the fastest aren't the ones doing the most. They're the ones doing the most of what matters. But the thing is, not yielding is just one reason people get held back. And there are actually 5 more career-killing mistakes that a lot of people make. So if you want to make sure you're not quietly sabotaging your own progress, then check out this video next. I break down 5 evidence-based reasons and academic studies on why great people still get passed over for the promotion.